A pair of shoes stolen from a small-town museum vanished into the dark for 13 years before the FBI found them again. When they finally reached an auction block, they didn't just sell. They obliterated every record the movie prop world had ever seen, for an amount that still doesn't feel real when you say it out loud. 6 feet wide, built with a working Gatling gun, and constructed specifically for wide shots where a smaller model wouldn't read on camera. That's the Batwing from Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, one of only 3 scaled versions ever built for the production. 2 of its siblings were tiny, a 2-foot model for crash sequences and a 5-inch version for a single shot of the aircraft crossing the moon. This one, the largest, is the only surviving example built at this particular scale, which meant that when it finally came up for public sale, there was no competing version anywhere in the world to compare it against. Bidders knew that going in, and the auction house had estimated somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. When the gavel came down, the Batwing sold for $409,500, landing right in the middle of what everyone expected. Sometimes the story isn't about a shocking number. It's about the quiet confirmation that even a background prop, one most audiences never consciously noticed, was worth exactly as much as the people who understood it thought it would be. Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid. Han Solo said it with a smirk, and generations of fans quoted it back without ever expecting to see the actual prop up for sale. One of the blaster pistols Harrison Ford carried in 1983's Return of the Jedi eventually did surface, at a Julian's auctions sale built around science fiction and fantasy memorabilia. The weapon wasn't just any Star Wars prop, it was, at the time it sold, the single most expensive item the entire franchise had ever produced at auction, edging past even Luke Skywalker's lightsaber from the earlier films. The final price landed at $550,000. A blaster that never fired a real bullet, made for a scene that lasted only a few seconds on screen, sold for more money than most houses in America. Han Solo would have had something sarcastic to say about that. Before there was a fedora, there was a whip, and Indiana Jones without one is barely Indiana Jones at all. A signature bullwhip prop from 1984's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came up at Heritage Auctions, part of a broader sale that also included a prop Grail Cup from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. The whip alone told a story the cup couldn't. It's the tool that defines the character in nearly every poster, every action figure, every piece of merchandise the franchise has ever produced. It sold for $525,000. The Grail Cup, by comparison, brought in $87,500 in that same sale, a reminder that even within one franchise's collection of relics, not every object commands the same kind of reverence. A cup that promises eternal life, apparently, still isn't as valuable as the whip that got the hero there in the first place. Provenance is everything in this hobby, and almost nothing illustrates that better than a single brown felt hat. The fedora worn in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came directly from the collection of stuntman Dean Ferrandini, who doubled for Harrison Ford in some of the film's most dangerous sequences. Alongside the hat itself, the lot included unpublished photographs of Ferrandini in full costume, wearing that exact fedora on set. That kind of documented, photo-matched history is rare in this market, where studios only started keeping careful inventory of their props within the last couple of decades. Bidding at Prop Store opened with an estimate between $250,000 and $500,000. It didn't stay there long. When the gavel fell, the fedora had sold for $630,000, a new record for any single item connected to the entire franchise, surpassing an earlier Raiders of the Lost Ark fedora that had held the record for nearly a decade. A hat that spent most of its screen time simply staying on Harrison Ford's head just outsold a whip, a Grail Cup, and a blaster from a different galaxy entirely. Provenance, it turns out, is worth more than any prop's actual role in the plot. Most people, asked to name a single object from The Wizard of Oz, would say the ruby slippers without a second thought. Almost nobody would say the Wicked Witch's hat. And yet, when Heritage Auctions offered a screen-matched hat worn by Margaret Hamilton, confirmed to the specific scene in Munchkinland where the witch first appears on screen, the price didn't behave like a footnote at all. This particular hat had already sold once before, back in 2020, for $252,000. That would have been a satisfying result on its own. Then, in December of 2024, the same hat came back to market, reunited for auction with a pair of ruby slippers that had themselves been stolen and recovered by the FBI decades apart. Interest in anything connected to the Wizard of Oz was already climbing, driven by a certain green-skinned witch dominating movie theaters that same season. The hat sold for $2,930,000. That's roughly 12 times what the exact same object sold for only 4 years earlier. Nothing about the hat changed in that time. Only the room full of people bidding on it did. Before computer graphics, spaceships were built by hand, filmed frame by painstaking frame against a black backdrop. And this particular X-Wing Starfighter miniature from the original 1977 Star Wars was one of the actual models used to bring that dogfight to life. Heritage Auctions offered the Red Leader model in October of 2023, and it set the world record at the time for any screen-matched, screen-used Star Wars prop ever sold. The distinction mattered. Plenty of Star Wars items exist that are merely associated with the production. This one had been confirmed, shot by shot, against the actual footage from the film. The final price reached $3,135,000. That record didn't last especially long, because in this particular corner of the collecting world, Star Wars props were about to enter an entirely different price tier altogether. Ask any Star Wars fan to picture the franchise's most recognizable object, and most will land somewhere close to a glowing red blade in a black-gloved fist. This particular lightsaber wasn't a one-film prop. It was screen-matched across 2 separate productions, appearing in dual scenes in both The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the 2 installments that turned Darth Vader from a masked henchman into the most iconic villain in cinema history. Prop Store had estimated the prop would sell somewhere between $1 million and $3 million, already an enormous range for a single object. Bidding blew straight through it. The lightsaber sold for $3,654,000, making it, at that exact moment, the single most valuable piece of Star Wars memorabilia ever brought to auction. To see a Star Wars lightsaber become the highest valued piece of the franchise ever sold at auction is incredibly special, said Prop Store's chief operating officer at the time. He had no way of knowing that title had less than a year left to live. Vader's blade held the record for barely a year before Luke Skywalker's answered right back. This wasn't simply the lightsaber from the earlier films, it was the exact prop wielded during the climactic Cloud City duel in The Empire Strikes Back, the scene where Vader delivers cinema's most famous plot twist, severing Luke's hand in the same moment he reveals the truth about his father. The lot didn't just include the 10-inch lightsaber built from a repurposed vintage camera flash handle. It also included the severed prosthetic hand itself, painted wounds and all, complete with the spring-loaded release mechanism that let it detach on cue during filming. Heritage Auctions opened bidding at $1 million and privately estimated the piece would land somewhere close to $2 million. Instead, the price climbed to $3,750,000, with the total including buyer's premium reaching close to $4,700,000. A new record, again, for the most valuable Star Wars prop ever sold, less than 12 months after the previous record had been set. This is one of the most important surviving Star Wars artifacts in existence, Heritage's executive vice president said afterward. Collectors understood that they were bidding on much more than a prop. They were competing for a genuine piece of modern mythology. Not every legendary prop comes from a franchise with spaceships or superheroes. Sometimes it's a plain white dress, worn for a single scene above a subway grate, that outlasts entire genres of collecting. The dress designer William Travilla created for Marilyn Monroe in the 1955 film The 7-Year Itch had passed, at some point, into the collection of actress Debbie Reynolds, who bought it for $200 and kept it for decades alongside thousands of other pieces of Hollywood history. Reynolds had originally hoped to open a museum with her collection. Instead, financial pressure eventually forced her to sell. At the Beverly Hills auction where it finally went under the hammer, in front of a crowd expecting something closer to $2 million, the bidding refused to stop climbing. The dress sold for $4,600,000, more than doubling every prediction in the room, with the buyer adding another $1 million in commission on top. A collector in attendance called the bidding that night totally crazy, especially in this recession. He wasn't wrong, but recessions, it turns out, have never once stopped anyone from chasing a piece of the exact moment an icon became immortal. Long before Christian Bale or Michael Keaton ever climbed behind the wheel, there was only one Batmobile that mattered, built by legendary customizer George Barris out of a one-of-a-kind 1955 Lincoln Futura concept car. Barris had 15 days and $15,000 to transform that Futura into the crime-fighting machine Adam West would drive across 3 seasons of 1960s television. Rocket boosters, machine guns, a bat phone built directly into the dashboard. When Barris finally decided to part with the car decades later, at a Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale, Arizona, he stood on stage beside it himself, explaining that he simply wanted someone else to have the chance to own it. The room didn't need much convincing. Bidding climbed into the multi-millions before the auction finally closed following a coin toss between two determined bidders. The final price landed at $4,620,000, a world record for any television or movie vehicle, and the second highest price ever paid for any car at a Barrett-Jackson auction, full stop, regardless of category. "I think it is the most valuable car in the world," Barris said afterward, "and the public really get a kick out of it when they see it." 13 separate gadgets. A Browning .30 caliber machine gun hidden in each fender, wheel hub mounted tire slashers, a retractable bulletproof rear screen, and revolving license plates that could switch between 3 countries at the push of a button. This particular 1965 Aston Martin DB5 never actually appeared on screen. It was one of 2 cars Eon Productions purchased directly from Aston Martin purely to promote the 1965 film Thunderball, built with every gadget first introduced a year earlier in Goldfinger. Unlike the cars used in actual filming, whose special effects were designed to survive only a single take, this promotional car's gadgets were engineered by Aston Martin itself to keep working indefinitely. R.M. Sotheby's estimated the car would sell somewhere between $4 and $6 million at their Monterey auction. It sold for $6,385,000, a new record for any DB5 ever sold, and, at the time, the most expensive piece of Bond memorabilia in history. No other car in history has played a more important leading role on film and in pop culture than the Aston Martin DB5, the auction house's specialist said afterward. Even that number, staggering as it is, would soon look almost modest next to what was coming for an entirely different kind of footwear. Item 12. The ruby slippers. They were never supposed to be worth anything at all. For decades, the sequined shoes worn by Judy Garland as Dorothy in 1939's The Wizard of Oz sat quietly among 4 known surviving pairs, treasured by film historians but hardly considered a financial cornerstone of anyone's collection. Then, in August of 2005, a man broke into the small Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, smashed a display case with a hammer, and vanished into the night with one particular pair. They were gone for 13 years. The FBI eventually recovered them in 2018 during a sting operation, and the man responsible, 77 years old by the time he was caught, pleaded guilty to the theft years later. That single act of theft and recovery turned an already famous prop into something closer to legend. When Heritage Auctions finally offered this exact pair for sale in December of 2024, riding a wave of renewed interest in all things Oz thanks to a certain green-skinned box office phenomenon, the pre-sale estimate sat at $3 million. Live bidding opened at $1,550,000 and blew past the entire estimate within seconds. The final price reached $28 million with the buyer's total, including the auction house's commission, landing at $32,500,000. It didn't just break the record for a movie prop. It shattered the previous record, Marilyn Monroe's white dress, by nearly $27 million in a single afternoon. No other pair of ruby slippers, the auction house noted afterward, has ever come close to that number, and it's difficult to imagine anything short of another theft and another decade-long disappearance ever producing a story compelling enough to challenge it. Every object on this list started out as disposable. A costume to be returned, a prop to be destroyed after the last take, a car built to survive one single promotional tour. Somewhere between the wrap of filming and the fall of a gavel, disposable became priceless, and nobody involved ever saw it coming.